Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm glad you've joined us again today. It's every day. Amy and I were joking earlier, the word unprecedented is getting overused right now, but none of us have ever been here before, and especially for church leaders with today's topic, I know this is of special interest to you as well. Needless to say, talking about money in the church is always challenging, but in this situation, it's even more challenging. And so that's where our focus is going to be today. We're going to first talk about how we talk about giving in the midst of crisis. Secondly, we're going to address specifically kind of on the expense side of ministry, how do we pull back on expenses while still continuing to engage ministry in an effective way during all of this? And then finally, we're going to be looking at how we can embrace opportunities, even while we're walking through this crisis together, so that we can prepare for better financial health in the long term. So that's where the focus is going to be today. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. We've invited three. We did not allow experts in today's conversation. These are practitioners. They're pastors in churches. And I'm really privileged to have this group with us representing churches of all different shapes and sizes. First of all, let me introduce to you Scott Moore. Scott's the lead pastor at Eastridge Church here in the Atlanta area, but just beyond the Atlanta area. They're in Covington, Georgia, so a little bit more rural as far as the Atlanta region is concerned. Scott's been at the church 30 years, which is quite impressive. In the last 12 years, he's been the lead pastor at the church. Scott, it's really kind of you to join us. We're glad to have you here today.
Hey, well, thank you. If I can help in any way, but I want to say this. I'm glad to do this. You and Amy both and the whole Unstuck team have helped Eastridge tremendously. So any way or shape or form I can help today, I'll be glad to.
Wow, that's kind of you. Additionally, with us today is Rick Holliday. Rick is the Executive Director of Central Services for North Point Ministries, and he's served in that role from the very beginning. So, Rick, how did you get that job?
Yes, some embarrassing college photography of Andy, and he had to keep me. So, but it's super easy. I want to echo what Scott said. It's easy to say yes to Tony when you see him standing out front at one of our campuses every Sunday serving, just like a normal guy. So thanks for your investment in the local church, Tony.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. We love, my wife and I both love our volunteer roles at North Point, and our small group too. We met yesterday, Rick. We met by Zoom just like this. And so it was good to be with friends last evening as well. And then David Vaughan, he's the senior pastor of Whitewater Crossing Christian Church. Back in my home state of Ohio, only he's in the wrong side of the state because I'm originally from the Cleveland area, and hence I'm a Browns and Indians fan. David is instead from the Cincinnati area on the wrong side of the state. But David, I'm glad you're a part of the conversation today.
Amen. I'm more of a Kentucky Blue Wildcat fan, but that's all right, Tony. And it's an honor to be here. My heart really goes out to pastors today, especially small church pastors. There's no playbook for this, so I hope I can help. Prepare to be underwhelmed, but I'm honored to be on this call.
It's good to have you. And as has been the case every week during these live webinars, I'm also joined this time in a co-host role. Amy Anderson, our Director of Consulting at the Unstuck Group. Amy, as always, it's good to have you as well.
Good to be here and good to be with this group of gentlemen who are leading great churches. Just a couple things about our live chat. As always, you can submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll be answering them both in real time and then some live Q&A at the end. Mark Meyer from the Unstuck Group will be answering questions via chat throughout the webinar, and then we'll be identifying those questions to cover in the Q&A. And by the way, anything that we can't get to live, we'll do our best to try to write a follow-up blog post to answer some of those questions. And as always, feel free to share your thoughts on Twitter and Facebook, and you can use the hashtag UnstuckChurch in that post as well. So with that, Tony, ready to dive in?
Yeah. Amy, do you like to be more on the asking the question side or the answering the question side? I'm just curious.
I like to be on the asking question side when you're the one asking the questions. Otherwise, you surprise me and throw me a curveball every once in a
Yeah,
while.
I
I
know. I
like to
do
be
that.
prepared.
Yeah, I do that. Yeah, so we're going to dive right in. The first topic we're going to hit today is how do we talk about giving in the midst of this crisis? And like I mentioned earlier, I mean, just talking about money when life is normal is a challenge for a lot of us. We want people to steward God's resources. We want people to be generous. And for me personally, I just know how God's used that discipline of giving to further my relationship with Jesus through the years. And yet it's people are facing financial challenge right now. We just heard this morning in the news that now close to 10 million people have filed for unemployment in just the last 2 weeks. So this is devastating, certainly for the people in our congregations as well. So Rick, I'm going to put you on the spot first this afternoon. How in the world do we interact with our congregation, and then more specifically with the people that are financially supporting our ministry in this season?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really difficult, Tony, because I was talking to some friends today. They both happen to be in a position where they're not as impacted by this. And they're like, you should be asking us for money. And I was like, well, you've got to understand 10 million people have filed for unemployment. For single moms and others that we ask, they're going to feel guilty. So it's a very nuanced conversation that you have to have. So I think just being honest, we should not hide from the fact that our church has needs. But we should not also put people on the spot and put them in a spot where they can't possibly participate. We lean toward gratitude and thanking people for the faithful support that they've had for us. And we also lean by focusing into what we want for our congregants and our attendees, not what we want from them. And so recently we had a gratitude campaign that we were embarking on at one of our campuses at Gwinnett Church. And we changed it to a just, what can we do for you and how can we pray for you? And we had some remarkable responses. If I could, I'd like to read a couple of them. This went out on Instagram. First one was someone said, wow, does your church do what my church does? Call and check up on you and ask how they can pray for you during this time. My church does. At Gwinnett Church, at Jeffrey Henderson, this world is forever a better place because of you. I mean, they felt love and acceptance in honestly a very big church. And then the second one, I just got a call from Alex at Gwinnett Church to see how my family was doing and just to check in and ask how she could pray for us. Heart, heart, heart. Thank you, Alex. I needed this today. I love my church in Fort Gwinnett, which is our local marketing campaign in Gwinnett County. So I just think if we do that, and then we're honest about how we're using money to support our family members in our local community and our church, and then let our need be made known in that way that we're being responsible with their money, people that will respond in our experience.
Yeah, and Rick, on that note, I think a good example of that this past week, Andy sent a note to the entire church talking about how kids ministry and student ministry is still leaning in and really working hard during the season. And they've completely reshaped how they do kids and student ministry. But the impact that area of the church is having right now, just to illustrate how the money is still being invested for good kingdom work during the season.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, but we're having about the same participation levels in children and student ministry virtually as we've been having physically, which is really amazing.
Yeah, so we'll get to more of that here in a moment. Scott, what are you doing and specifically, I mentioned you're in a little bit more rural area, and I know a little bit more about your church too, because Amy and I have interacted with your ministry through the years. And so though you're a multi-generational church, there's definitely some representation from the older generations in your church. So when you're communicating with your congregation, how do you specifically help the older people in your congregation who may have been in the past less inclined to use online giving? And do you have any early wins that you can share along those lines?
Well, I think going along with what Rick said, I think the first thing we have to do is approach it. What we're trying to do is approach it from a shepherding point of view. and not from a survival mindset. I mean, it's a real crisis that we're in, but we're trying to communicate to them, hey, what can we do for you? How are you doing? Just by checking in on them regularly, what physical needs, because a lot of these, some of them are widows, they live by themselves and they're scared. And so we are trying to comfort them in that way. But also too, I heard Richard Blackaby say this just, I think last week, when we're communicating with them, we're trying to say, hey, when this is over, when we get through this, and I think the reason that phrase is so important is we're trying to offer them hope that this isn't going to last forever. But also the question is, who do you want to be on the other side of it? And so like you said, Tony, a few minutes ago, giving has been one of those disciplines in our life that have helped us grow in our trust with the Lord. And so we're trying to just keep that message out there, but also as far as getting them to try online giving, we are trying everything: email, sending videos out, social media, again, email also. But what we have found, even though they may be reluctant to online giving, every single one of our seniors text. They love to text. And so we're pushing, text to give also. And so as far as early wins, this is our second week, so we've not seen the numbers of who gave online for the first time this week. But last week, we did see 8 first-time online givers. And so
That's
our
encouraging.
text to give we haven't seen any changes yet, but we are seeing more people begin the online giving.
That's encouraging. Very good. All right, David. One thing I've always appreciated about you is a lot of senior pastors I work with are really gifted when it comes to casting vision and then connecting generosity with vision. And I shouldn't have been surprised when I started to hear stories about how you've been communicating with your congregation during this season, that again, you were leading with strength in this area. And I've always appreciated about that. But how do you talk about giving in the season when there are so many people that are being personally impacted, either directly by the virus or indirectly because of layoffs in this season?
Yeah, great question. I didn't have any of this in Bible college. Probably most of the guys who are pastors watching this, it took me a while to figure out my 3 main jobs are raising men, morale, and money. And all 3 are connected. And so when a crisis like this happens, man, you better be good at casting vision to all 3 of those. And so I haven't figured out yet if people are following me or chasing me. I think there's a little bit of both. Some of you guys could probably relate to that. So for me, it is about, and I don't know where I got this along the way, but whenever there's a crisis, anything like this, I kind of default back to an axiom: trust God and tell the people. Trust God, but tell the people, because you're not going to have any outcome if you got no
David,
income.
Can you repeat that one more time? I didn't hear you on my end, so I don't know if others missed it as well. Can you repeat that?
Trust God and tell the people. Trust God, tell the people. The second line was, you can't have any outcome if you don't have any income. So to me, I'm trusting God fully, but I'm going to work and tell the right people the right thing at the right time. So in my mind, the way I approach it, I'm going to target or tailor make my asking of men and women for money in the context of where they are. Are they in a season of shortage or a season of surplus? And, as everybody's already said, you have got different categories, different people in different categories. Rick alluded to that. So I kind of look at them as non-givers or reluctant people. And boy, they're going to have a different message. And I'm choosing to believe, this may be the naive Kentucky David coming out, but I'm choosing to believe that people are not giving, not because they're stingy, it's because they're strapped. So they're in a season of shortage. So how can we be the church? But then casual givers are another category. Thoughtful givers, we would classify another category. And then really gifted givers who are affected with their net worth, but their self-worth is still intact to the degree and their net worth that they're able to bless. So you cannot be a holy hinter in this season, in this crisis. You've got to say what is going on. Trust God, but tell the people. So, and that's probably another podcast on how to approach the high capacity givers. But
Right.
Early on, a couple of weeks ago, when I saw this storm brewing, emailed our highest givers who I have a relationship with, and it was more of an asking to ask email. Hey, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know where and how much I'll need your help, but could I email you the Monday after Easter, tell you where we're at, and you pray about if you're in a position to help. And overwhelmingly positive response. I'll link that email template to you, Tony, and the guys can look at it.
We'll share that. We will definitely share that.
Now it decreased the stress on me knowing I had in my pocket a group of people who are dedicated to the mission that they will allow me to ask then. And that has been really, really helpful.
And David, just to follow up on that, what I've noticed even before this crisis is people that are generous with their time or their money or both, when there's a need, an obvious need, they're kind of waiting for their leader to ask them, how can I participate? How can I help? And so I love the fact that you took the initiative.
Yeah, they're already used to being asked. This is something pastors got to get over. Everybody's asking, but you're asking for something beyond you. So, man, learn to be a master asker and tailor make it to the groups that you are talking to, because they're going to hear it with a different filter depending on where they are in a season of shortage or surplus.
I'm glad you enunciated that appropriately.
Yeah, you got to be careful. It's Cincinnati now, so.
David, you've got a line for everything. That's one of the things I love about you.
Yeah, and I stole them from so many people that I don't remember anymore, so I just act like they're mine.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's switch gears, guys. I think we should talk about how churches are approaching changes in their budget right now, including things like how they're pulling back on expenses while trying not to sacrifice any of the ministry opportunity that's out there. So, Scott, let me start with you on this one. For you, has there been a shift in giving that for you've had to change your expenditures? What have you had to react to so far?
Yeah, the change in giving has been huge. So the first week, we had half of what normally comes in, what is needed for the budget. And so we were expecting that. And I thank God we got a great elder board. We got a great executive pastor in Trey who has really managed our finances well. But still, when you see half come in what normally comes in, it's still a hit to the system. But we had, speaking of faithful givers and leaders, so on Tuesday, I got a phone call from one of our givers, and he's probably he's a very generous giver, to the church, and he'd already given, and he saw the budget come in, and he said, hey, I want to give some more. So he gave a $2,500 check, online. And then Wow. I got a phone call on Thursday that someone who's always just been faithful and consistent, they gave a $27,500 gift online. Wow. And so, so the first week we came in half of what we normally get. And the second week we came in 1.5 times what we normally get. And so, yeah, we've seen it, doing this right here, but it just speaks to me. This, it is God's church. And I think what David said too, leaders are watching the giving, and so whether we ask, I think it is very important to ask. But I tell you what, it was just an encouragement, to see that. What are we doing? We went ahead, one of our members called us, and he's in banking. He said, hey, because we have about a $10,000 mortgage every month. And he said, hey, you can call your bank and they'll defer your mortgage for 3 months. And so that right there is one thing we've done, and that saved us about $30,000 coming up. Also, we're looking at suspending just outside contracts like cleaning. Right now, nobody's coming to the building and probably won't now for another 8 weeks. So that's a contract that we've suspended. Lawn care, places begin to look pretty ragged, but the checkbook is not. And so we're thankful for that. And then also we're just looking at, garbage removal, anything on the outside that doesn't affect us ministering to people, because all those dollars do represent people. And so, and then this is, every homeowner is probably doing this, but we've cut our thermostats back, and that's probably going to save us another $10,000 over the next 3 months as well. So those are some of the things that we're doing right now.
That's good. That's good. David, for you, the needs for ministry are higher in crisis.
Yeah.
But giving is likely being impacted. So how about you? How are you responding?
Yeah, there is no doubt. In my mind, in our team's mind, we're thinking strategy and opportunity first, then staffing and programming along those mission critical pathways. Um, so I think it's an opportunity for guys who need to make changes to make them now, and everyone is much more understandable. And so you don't want to be disingenuous. I think pastors put off necessary but difficult conversations in regular time, but this is the time to speak up. But I kind of approach it as a position of opportunity. Don't have a scarcity mindset, have an abundance mentality, but use this time to figure out what is the mission critical pathway of the church. What is it that we are really about? And so what I think what crisis does is it bumps you from your comfort zone to your creative zone. So be creative, but people are watching how you budget your money, how you spend your money like never before. High cap givers, as well as people who've lost their jobs, are saying, well, what is the church doing? So I agree with Todd Harper. I wrote this down yesterday from Generous Giving. He says, generosity is the new apologetic. That is so true. So, and I think that's what Scott and Rick are saying, that, you know, you can't be good news without having good deeds. So I think this is the time to double down on the people who need it the most. And I think you're asking, as I already said before, is geared toward people who already love the church and want to help. And boy, this is like the best opportunity in my lifetime to truly be Acts 2, where people are sharing, knowing and being known, loved and being loved. Normal broke people. I'm not talking about the normal strain. Pastors will understand of people who always seem to be broke. I'm talking about the millions now who are used to be on the giver end. Now they have to humble themselves to receive. This is the time to be the church. And so that for me, that's the thoughts that I lean into.
Have you or Scott, have you redeployed any staff away from what they were doing to put them on the most critical ministry areas right now?
Scott, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. You know, we had this conversation yesterday. Some of our staff are very hands-on in what they do, very specific ministries, and some of those things, because we're not meeting together on Sundays or Thursday nights, is not happening. But right now, we've redeployed them. Hey, we're all shepherds right now. You know, we're calling our people. We're, you know, and not just a text. You know, some people would rather have a text. But let's be hands-on, and let's make sure. I think it was Rick that was saying that about Gwinnett Church. You know, let's call our people and let's make sure we're loving them. So we've redeployed them in that way. And also, too, the whole online church. Before, online church for us was a way you could be part of the live service. Now it's our only service. And so now we're looking at redeploying people, how they can interact with people as the service is going on.
That's good.
Yeah, we have also done same. We just said, this is our highest priority the next 90 days, it's church online, community, church at home. It's member congregational care, and it's a life center, which is our hands and feet of Jesus in the community. And if everybody doesn't fit in there, we're going to have to figure out how to put you in there. I had this amazing thought. You know, it takes me a while, maybe I'm from Kentucky, but this is the first time in my lifetime I remember preachers or church staff ever truly having Sunday off that they could take as a Sabbath. And I know Saturday's, the Sabbath. I get all that. I did go to Bible college. But anyway, I mean, think about it. Any of y'all watching any of an Unstuck Group, can you remember a time when you could get up, have a cup of coffee, worship, pray, spend time with your family on the Sunday like never before? So what I try to tell our staff is, look, I know you struggle with a sabbatical or Sabbath before. Take Sunday. We may need you on these other days, but I mean, take advantage of it. And that's what I think there are opportunities more than obstacles. And I think that has to be conveyed to your people. But you got to redeploy people. Our staff can be benevolence or they can be employed, but you can't pay somebody just because you like them. They got to be strategic, and that's another podcast that Tony's so good at having. But so they need to see your heart. But people are watching how you spend your money in the church because they are having to do that. and they're a little suspect if you don't do it strategically.
Mm-hmm. David, I'm having the opposite problem with my husband taking the Sabbaths. For years, I worked during the week and then he worked over the weekend, and now we're together 24/7. So,
And no football for you.
how long will this last?
Your pain.
Thank you. Yeah, we're praying about the football season. Hey, Rick, let me get your thoughts on this one. How just practically should churches be reducing expenses while they're still carrying out their mission and vision? What ideas do you have?
Well, Scott and David have hit a lot of that. But I will quote the great theologian Rahm Emmanuel here, who said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And so, not to be awful here, but if you have been contemplating changes, you absolutely should prioritize keeping your best people. And now's the time to make some changes. And I know that sounds awful, but if you have to reduce, don't feel like you have to be egalitarian and treat everybody the same. You absolutely should keep your best performers, and you absolutely should prioritize letting your not as good performers go. And I know that can sound terrible, but to me, it's a stewardship issue. And God gave us resources to utilize in order to use them for the most effective spread of the gospel possible. And if you have people that are hindering you from doing that, and you've been worried about doing something about it because who they're married to or whatever position they've held, now's the time to change that. So that's one thing. The second is something these guys have already mentioned. Focus on your opportunities now. For us, those are online and groups, and this very well could be a monumental time, and it could change the way church in the U.S. and around the world is done. And we need to be paying attention to what's happening and where the new opportunities are. And we need to be moving resources. So we're doing that. We spend a lot of money. If you've been to one of our campuses, you know we spend a lot of money on physical environment creation. And a lot of that's not happening these days. And so we're able to take some of those resources and slide them into digital opportunities and other ways to reach into the community and to be generous, to ramp up our care efforts. We've given away over the last 12 years over $50 million to our local partners, people that run food pantries and clothes closets and all that sort of thing. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying to say we've made a financial investment in the community. Now, dollars are needed, but right now, because of the social distancing rules, volunteers are needed. So figuring out how to plug into key ministries in your area, then help them, help the community, will pay off big time long-term in your community, because you will be seen as a community partner and advocate in ways that other people that just mind their own business won't be seen. So I think those are some things. And then look for all the other things. Scott ran through a great list of cutting back on energy costs, deferring maintenance. We've pressed pause on non-essential hires, and we're figuring out how to redeploy assets in our organizations right now. Don't hire an outside contractor. You know, find somebody internally that is less utilized than people that are. And right now, you probably had a model that ran really well and you had everybody fairly evenly utilized. Right now, our content creation people are slammed. Our physical environment creation people are, in some cases, underutilized. So try to figure out, I think you asked, Amy, how do we reallocate some of those people? Maybe somebody's got a graphic design background that could help in that area instead of hiring a service out, or whatever it might be. Lots of people can run video cameras. And if not that, then supplement the things that, say our digital team is running just crazy, hair on fire right now. How can we do bureaucratic things for them that free them up to use their specialized talents in a unique way in this season? So I just think maximizing the resources we have, diminishing our expenses, and paying attention to opportunities. And I would say even prioritizing giving up something we used to do to chase a new opportunity, because God may unveil a new way to do something in this season that you weren't open to before. And there's lots of those that are coming to the forefront. And I think it might even be the season to try something new. And to David's point, having a key connection to resourced individuals in your church, and not having a broadcast message that says give, but have it to these resource people that can give. And you know what? They love to give based on an investment mentality. If you go to them and say, if you could give me $25,000, I can do this with it. That rings the bell of a resource person in the way it doesn't always ring the bell of someone who's giving out of their income at a lower amount, because they're used to thinking in terms of ROI and investment return. And that language right now, I agree with David. You should not be bashful, but you should be careful who you talk to in that way. But when you are talking to that person, talk boldly, because God may be giving you an opportunity in your community you've just not had up until now.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
very good. And Rick, your thoughts there actually lead into this final section that I wanted to talk about this afternoon, which is about embracing the opportunity for longer term financial health. Even while we're in the midst of this crisis, what are some things that we could be doing so that once this is behind us, the church is in a better place financially? David, I think I want to start with you on this one. As from your position, what could churches be doing today in the midst of this crisis to better position themselves for financial health after this is behind us?
Yeah, I think during a storm and after the storm, when we pivot to whatever's next, obviously communication is critical. People are down on what they're not up on, so over communicate. I think most pastors underestimated their communication platforms, even their online giving platform. But I would say build relationships now in the storm that you will lean into after the storm. Even for those who are not able to financially give, they will remember that you cared. And then those who are high cap people, leaders or givers, they will come through for you now, and maybe they'll come through at year end. I checked on one of our high capacity givers who ironically did what Rick was saying. His organization here in town had needed to make some changes, and he was so afraid of hurting some feelings. So he went ahead and announced it, and everybody accepted it because of the current crisis. So I just texted him, said, "How you doing?" And he said, "It's so nice to hear from you, just asking how I was doing more than asking for something." What he doesn't know is I'm going to ask for something later. But anyway, he knows that too, but it's nice to be asked. And so I would say continue to build important relationships with people. It's relationship. And I personally think building margin now, thinking about estate planning should not be underestimated. We are in a position, a little bit more of abundance, because a wonderful estate gift came through right before this that we had no idea we were even going to get. That helps relieve some pressure. But I think the next pivot is to help the millions in our church who need millions of dollars. So I can't remember who it was I stole it from, but new levels bring new devils. There's my Amy quote for the day.
There you go. I knew it was coming.
And you got a whole nother devil for crisis number 2 that we're not prepared for. So my final thought is that, and I don't know if this makes sense, maybe some guys watching, I found that pastors who like Sundays more are so stressed right now, but because they're preaching to a camera, but they like the feedback of people. They like the interaction. On the dark side, it's the stroke of their ego. Right now, pastors who are Sunday pastors, they hate it. But pastors who are Monday pastors, and what I mean by that is they're leaders, not just communicators, but they're leaders, they are more energized than ever. So as I coach guys, I can tell a big difference between the Sunday guys and the Monday guys. And so if you're a Sunday guy, you better lean into some Monday stuff. And if you're a Monday guy and your communication is not so great, you better lean into the Sunday, because if that's how people are judging your church right now online, that has to be, holy shoddy is still shoddy. So, I mean, you got to kind of be a little bit better. I would say work on that which in this season most needs the work, but I would prepare for the pivot, not the current. This is what I'm saying. And get the smartest people around you who can say, okay, what's next? And then, because I think you deal with scenarios and not just solutions. So I'm in scenario mode now, and I'm appreciative of that. People who kept reminding me, this is just step 1.
Yeah. And on that note, leaders, if you're listening to this, you ought to begin thinking now, how is this going to change our ministry forever? Mm-hmm. Not just in these next weeks and months. How is this going to be changing our ministry for the future ahead of us? Because there are going to be changes that come out of this. There's no doubt about it. Rick, in fact, this kind of gets to the question I had in mind for you. there are going to be some opportunities for churches to start to take advantage of new ministry opportunities that are going to emerge in the next weeks and months. But income for a lot of churches that are listening is going to be going down. So how do we start to take advantage of those new opportunities when the income stream may not be what it used to be?
Well, I'm not real smart, Tony, but if your income is going down and you want to do new stuff, you better make sure your expenses go down more. I mean, it really boils down to that. And so if you've exhausted your fundraising and vision giving and you're in a strapped community, you're going to have to figure out some ways to make your expenses go down. I think, at least for our church, and y'all are all probably better leaders than I am, but we are way too quick to hire somebody to solve a problem than to use volunteers to solve a problem. And I think there are people that have time on their hands that want to do things. And if we're creative, we can figure out a way to leverage those people in a way so that we can do more with less. And you may even be in a season where you can't afford to pay some people, but you can afford to have a volunteer coordinator to do some things you couldn't do before. And then that may lower your cost enough. That and the other things Scott had mentioned and David's mentioned about controlling, you know, if you've got a building, you've got a mortgage, you got to figure out how to hold on to them, I think. But you still need to think, and you're exactly right, Tony. We need to be thinking ahead. We need to be looking 3-5 years out and going, what are we doing now that we're going to need to keep doing if we want to effectively minister to our community? And we need to start making those changes now. And so that means we need to pay attention to what's working. And as Andy calls things, where we find the old couches in our organization that nobody wants to admit that they smell and they're ugly and they've got rips and stains, but they're sentimental, so we hold on to them. If that may be programs, it might be people, it might be facilities. We need to get rid of them, you know. And then because we're holding on to things that are not helping us anymore, and we've got to hold on and prioritize the things that are helping. So it can be a very painful season, but it could also be a very productive season if we pray through and get wise counsel and figure out what are the things that really, really are working, and be honest with ourselves. Colin says, turn over the rocks and look at all the squiggly things and see what's down there and tell the truth about them. If we'll do that, it may be a season of opportunity. The biggest thing I could do is, if I could encourage anything, is I could echo something David's already mentioned, which is in that process, don't look to assign a dollar to spend for every dollar you save. If you do not have margin in your budget right now, you need to use this season to at least pivot to the point where you can create margin. And I'll tell you right now, people, organizations, and ministries that had unallocated income are able to ride this out a lot better than people that every year figure out what they think the income's going to be. Not only that, but they come up with what the God glorifying income's going to be, and then they plan to spend every dollar of it. Okay, that's not good stewardship. Now, just as a personal and an organizational practice, we only budget on 90% of our conservatively projected revenues. And whatever number you want to pick that's less than 100, you should pick. And so that's a forward-thinking strategy, but it's something you should be moving forward toward now, because we didn't think this would ever happen. And then 9/11 happened. And it couldn't happen again. And then the Great Recession happened. And it couldn't happen again, but the coronavirus thing happened. Guess what? It's going to happen again. So let's get ready and let's prepare for it so that we have some margin in the future so we don't feel like we're strapped. Sorry to preach, but I feel pretty strongly about that one.
I was thinking that, Rick. I think we could give you the platform. That was a good message.
So just to follow up with what Rick was just talking about, a few months ago, I did a podcast interview with Chris Hodges from Church of the Highlands in the Alabama, Birmingham, right? Isn't that where the church is? Yeah. So if that whole principle on budgeting on 90% of what came in the previous 12 months, Chris unpacks that completely and talks about how his church has used that from the very beginning. And especially in seasons like this, they're in a position of strength to really take advantage now of the opportunity that ministry has, especially in these moments of crisis. So I hope you'll go back and listen to that podcast, and we'll share a link to that conversation in the email that goes out tomorrow morning with the recording of this webinar. Scott, you get the final official question, but then we have all the good questions here at the very end. The final question, though, for you is, again, we talked about it earlier. Seems like there's a greater challenge, or you could look at it as an opportunity if you're an optimist, for churches like yours that are in more rural areas with a slightly older congregation. So how would you encourage other senior pastors who are facing this challenge right now? How would you encourage them as they're leading their churches in a similar situation?
You know, my own experience and then talking to other lead pastors, I think you have to deal with your own fear first. You know, just give it to the Lord. You know, prior to that first offering coming in, we were watching the stock markets. We were listening to the news. We saw the layoffs beginning to happen, heard it from people in our church who were being laid off. I think that week, I feel like every time I turned around, I was like, Lord, I'm just giving this to you. Lord, I'm giving this to you. So when that $15,000 offering came in instead of a $30,000 offering came in, you know what? I knew it was the Lord's church, and, you know, I knew he loved the church. I also knew he called me as a leader, you know, and I knew he was going to use me to lead through it. But I would say deal with your own fear first. Dave Kinnaman, in his book, Stay the Pastors, just came out. He had a great definition for ministry. He said it's when you control nothing, but you're responsible for everything. You know, and I tell you, I don't know a pastor who doesn't feel that way, that, you know, you can control nothing, but you're responsible for everything. Another thing too, I think just keep on loving them. You know, be sure the church is just shepherding them. My mom goes to the church, and so every Sunday I preach a fantastic sermon. I've never preached a bad sermon according to my mom, but I check on her every day. We do a family devotion and we FaceTime her in, and so about every 3 or 4 days, I said, how are you doing? I ask her that every day, but every 3 or 4 days, she goes, well, Don, my small group leader called. He checked on me today. He's 80 years old. You know, I mean, just the church is just loving on people. So I would just make sure, you know, your people are being loved on. And also remember, they love the church. You know, they do. They love the church, and they want the church to do well. They want to see the mission fulfilled. They want to see people come to Christ. They want that. And I think it's already been said. I think both David and Rick have said this. Be transparent with them. You know, they know there's needs, you know. And also, too, I would say value them. They have seen, you know, some of our, I think our oldest member is 90 plus. They have seen hard times before, and they've got wisdom in walking with the Lord and insight that this 30-year-old, 52, this 52-year-old doesn't have, you know. And so I would say love them, remember them, be transparent, and just value them.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. I appreciate that, Scott. All right. Well, in a moment, we're going to jump to, and I'm seeing a list of great questions that have come in while we've been having this conversation. So I want to get to that. However, before we get to Q&A, let me just share again at the Unstuck Group, we want to help churches wherever you are in this process right now, responding to the crisis. For some of you, you're still in it, and you're trying to figure out how do we take our next steps in the midst of this crisis? And you're really looking for some one-on-one coaching. If that's you, we do have an opportunity for you. If you go to the unstuckgroup.com/coaching, we're offering 4 weeks of coaching during this next season just to help you get some next steps that you can work towards as it relates to finances, what you're doing with your staff team, how you're responding to your community, lots of online services. There are a lot of key questions that I know many churches that are watching today, you've never had to think about before. And so we want to walk with you through that. And a number of churches have already engaged in that coaching. And so if that's of interest to you, again, the website you need to go to is theunstuckgroup.com/coaching. All right. So Amy knows this is my favorite part of these panel conversations because I get to pick the hardest question I want and then give it to the panelists that I think can respond to it most effectively. So we'll see here let's start with this one related to the Paycheck Protection Program. Any of you done any research on that you feel like you could give some guidance to the church leaders that are listening in? Rick, can you just give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're eligible if you're a 501c3 and you have less than 500 employees for the most important parts of the provision. That's the biggest thing. And the bottom line is that your formula is your salary and benefit cost for a 10-week period. So you take a month of salary and benefit costs. Say you take last year's expenses or this year so far, annualize it to a year, divide it by 12 and multiply by 2.5. So you get 10 weeks worth of coverage, and you can apply for more than that. But you can use it for things like rent, and it's meant to keep your staff employed. That's the intent. When you keep the plan in place for a year, a loan forgiveness part will kick in, and you will be forgiven for up to that 2.5x amount. So it effectively, and the politicians will admit this, is a grant for nonprofit organizations. So I don't know how you feel philosophically about it, but the way I look at it is I'm a bit of a libertarian, and I still think this is the best way to get money into the hands of people that will actually put it back into the economy and use it, which is the intent of the program. And as a good friend of mine who's way smarter than I am said, there's gonna be lots of people that try to get into this to use it for all the wrong reasons. Churches will use it for the right reasons. And so go for it. I think that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. So, and you need to act quickly too, by the way. So I'm not going to pretend to have all the expertise on it. I will say this, obviously at the Unstuck Group, all three of these guys said we stopped hiring contractors. Well, guess what? That's us. So I hope you're loving the content we're providing for free, but because it's not paying the bills, I can tell you that. So obviously we're paying attention to this at the Unstuck Group as well, but you need to talk with your accountant or your bank, and you need to do that today. Because applications are going to start to go in tomorrow across the country. And so I want to make sure you're on the front line of all of that. David, I think I'm going to ask you this question. Should pastors be considering pay cuts in this season?
Mm-hmm. Well, it depends. Is it a pay cut for the pastor or a pay cut for the staff? That would be my answer. I think churches that have no margin, again, Warren Buffett nailed it in 2008. It's only when the tide goes out do you discover who's been swimming naked. And I think that applies to churches in the right context. So if you have minimal reserve, you're going to have to cut your salary as well as other people on the staff. If you have a bit more reserve built up that's healthy, 6, 8, 10 weeks. I've talked to guys though that they're rolling like 2-3 weeks up into this point, and somebody, the pastor has to. They're not the exception; they're the example. So if you're going to cut everybody else, you're going to have to go first. So I would say yes, but it depends on your situation and how mission critical they are, and what their reserves are at that moment.
And let me say this again, referring to the question that we just answered. If you are planning to participate in the Paycheck Protection Program, make sure you understand the guidelines around salary reductions, because that is one of the guidelines that they're looking at. Obviously, that whole program's intended to protect jobs and to protect income. So you'll just want to make sure if you're going to make adjustments that you understand the guidance there before you move forward. Scott, I'm going to choose you on this one. Amy, you get to ask the next question. Do you have the list in front of you?
I do not.
All right. So I'm going to do this for you.
You're in
Amy.
charge.
Just sit back and enjoy this part of the conversation. Okay. Scott, here it is. Any suggestions for smaller churches with little or no staff? What can you be doing because of the adjustment in giving? So as giving goes down and you're in a situation where there's just not a lot of staff either, how do smaller churches, what coaching could we give them?
You know what? I think everybody, one, not only do people want something to do, they want something that matters. And God has people's attention right now, and so I think let those ministry needs be known to the church, however you want to get that on your Sunday morning service or email, video, Facebook, whatever. Let people know. And I think there's a lot of people out there right now who before didn't have time to serve. They're saying, hey, Lord, you got my attention. What can I do? So I say just make those ministry opportunities known.
Yeah. Rick, I think this is a good question for you. And again, we want to take into consideration that payroll protection program, but it's about right-sizing staff. And my normal guidance is when there's a financial crisis in a community, for churches to take advantage of that and make the right-sizing decisions that they've probably known they have to make, but haven't had the opportunity to make. That guidance is a little bit different in the context of this crisis if churches are going to participate in that program. But any further thoughts on right-sizing staff in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to be careful to what the impact is to the programs. You first have to decide if you're going to participate or not. And I'm sidestepping you a little bit because it's such an individual nuanced conversation. I would counsel every church to either have an audit or a review done. If you are having one of those, the person you should contact first is the auditor in that program. If you don't have that, you almost certainly have a CPA or an audit, someone or a banker in your organization that can guide you through the PPA process. There's also tons of great resources about that. All that to say, I think that if you don't want to downsize staff and you can't live within the confines of either a individual payroll cost reduction or overall sweeping payroll cost reduction, and to be honest with you, Tony, I don't know the impact of if everyone takes a pay cut, how does that look versus some people take a pay cut? And so I'm not the right person to ask that question to. But I do think that's the case where filling in gaps with volunteer labor is part of the answer. So maybe I didn't answer your question, but.
Yeah, and again, this situation is so different for churches that may be participating in the government grant, because normally in a financial tightening, my guidance to church leaders is don't do across the board pay cuts. Adjust your staffing appropriately so that you're able to compensate the leaders on your team appropriately as well going forward, and then really lean into hiring people that can help you build teams and get ministry done through other people. But in this situation, if you're going to be participating in that program, you need to walk cautiously so that you make sure you have a complete understanding of what that would look like. David, I'm going to ask you this one because you've already been demonstrating this in today's conversation. What's your coaching on the best way to tell stories about generosity?
Well, people love stories. And so I collect them all the time. And I think God always is telling the story beyond our story. Remember that upper story, lower story. So I do think God's going to tell a story through this and through people. So I would collect them. Again, our job, in my opinion, you raise men, morale, money, and all are intimately tied together. And so the more stories you can tell that lift men up, that lift morale up, that help raise money is going to make all the difference in the world. But tell stories of people being generous and tell people stories of those receiving it. The most humble thing is to receive when you're used to being a giver. And I think the next pivot is going to be that. So we are collecting stories of neighbors helping neighbors. There was a little boy across the street from my house that had a birthday party. And when I got home, all the people in our neighborhood lined up with balloons and stuff in their cars and honked the horn. And that little boy stood out in that driveway. I know my neighbors, but I don't know them that well. And most of my neighbors, I don't even think believe in Jesus, yet it instilled such hope in me. And I think people are better than we often think they are. And it's just a great opportunity to be the church, whether you love Jesus or not, and they don't even know it. But I just went back in my house and said, maybe there is hope, right now. And so the more you can tell those stories, again, my heart is the stories of preachers. And I'm so thankful for Tony, your team, and the Unstuck Group. And I know I would consider you essential personnel right now. You know, I know you didn't pay me to do that, but that's why I appreciate you, because preachers really need somebody. Nobody knows like somebody who's been there. And so my story is one of helping, in my opinion, encourage other pastors who are watching or will watch this, that there is hope. There is hope. You can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a pastor, David, say this week, I mean, if the church isn't stuck now, when is it going to be stuck? And he was just assuming we were just being bombarded with churches wanting to hire us right now. I don't know who the Unstuck Group calls when it gets stuck. That's my big question.
I got a good story or axiom for you along the way. That's all I got.
So Scott, again, we referenced this at the very beginning. People are hurting, and especially people in our communities that didn't come into this crisis in a healthy position. How do we help? How do we help people? How do we help the least of these in this time when the church is being stretched, both in time and financially as well? Any sense of how we could give encouragement to churches that are dealing with that tension right now?
You know, I know that you feel like you don't have anything to offer because finances are strapped, but sometimes, you know, love never fails, you know, and people can tell when you're being genuine and you truly love them. And so whether, you know, whoever it may be in the community, if they can have someone that'll listen to them, someone that can pray for them, but also too, there are a lot of agencies that we can refer people to. And I think having that on the hand, but the main thing is let's just love these people, you know, because I think at the end of it, I don't remember who said it, but at the end of it, they're going to remember who loved them, you know, and who was there for them, who cared for them, who shepherded them. And also too, it may just require personal sacrifice. You know, I think sometimes it doesn't come from the church checkbook. It comes from, you know, our personal checkbooks. So I think we just set the example in that.
All right, Rick, you get the last question of the day. It's a very practical one, and I'm sure there are several churches out there that are dealing with the situation. This church has acknowledged that we were just about ready to start a giving push coming into this because the church's finances were in trouble. So any advice for them? It says this person is saying, we feel like we have to do this because we can't put it off. So any suggestions for churches like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's where you continue with your giving push, but you do it in a very personal way. I think I saw one of the questions pop up talking about how do you segment using your online Sunday morning ask. I don't think that's the place to do this, to be honest with you. I think that's the place to say thank you and to demonstrate how you're using people's hard-earned money in the line of ministry. I think the way you do a giving push is you call, in a small church, you call everybody and you let them know you lay your cards out there. This is where we are. This is what we need. Could you pray about helping? And for people that I think David was spot on. When you know you have resourced individuals, and I don't know where the cutoff line is, but it's that line where people that are, you can tell they're going to survive this okay. I think it's okay to tell them a specific ask and say, here, we'd like you to be this generous. But you can't be God. You can't be the Holy Spirit. But I do think in that situation, you should. And I think the encouragement I have is God knew all this was coming, and we are part of his local church, and he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He owns all the gold, and he can provide for us no matter what the economy does. And he has a way of doing it. And I have a feeling that coming out of this, if we go into this with an attitude of dependence on God, God's going to show up in a big way in some churches' lives, and they're going to be able to tell some stories that are unbelievable. And that's not Pollyanna. That's just God's economy. And so I think we should ask, but our faith should not be in other people's pocketbooks. It should be in our Father, who's always been generous to us, and just watch and pray. You know, it's old school, but watch and pray and watch how God provides, but also act. And so in that situation, yes, I would ask, but I'd make it very personal and as specific as possible given the person's means and needs.
Very good. Rick, I'm going to talk with Andy and see if we could get you preaching more often at North Point.
Yeah.
That's right.
Rick, thanks for joining us. Scott, really appreciate you and your church. Tell your team that Amy and I said hello. We miss you guys. David, love what your church is doing up in the Cincinnati, Kentucky, Indiana, the tri-state area. I mean, your church is having a great impact. And even in the midst of this crisis, it's just fun to see your team elevate and really help people take their next step toward Jesus. So I love that. Amy, always good to have these experiences with you. And for you, the church leaders that are listening, again, I'm praying for a pastor. I'm praying for your church. I'm praying for your community daily. And our team, even before this happened, our team committed early in this year that we want to be for you and we want to pray for you and we want you to be having the greatest kingdom impact you can have in your communities. We're going to continue to pray for that in this season. But if you need help, we're there to help you take your next steps as well. And so please reach out to us at theunstuckgroup.com. Until we see you next week, feel free to email us too at help@theunstuckgroup.com. We'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday afternoon.